Okay, we can get started. People are still kind of coming in, but I'm going to get started regardless. So thanks everyone for joining us for our Water at Wayne seminar today. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a couple of Zoom tips just to keep everything smooth. I'm going to have all the participants except for the speakers muted throughout the event. I'm going to ask everyone to keep their videos off except for the speakers. Just so we can reduce the bandwidth and reduce the potential technical issues we might have. And I'm going to ask that everyone ask questions through the chat box throughout the event. And following the seminar, we're going to have a Q&A. The last 10 minutes will be set aside for Q&A. So feel free to send questions throughout the seminar to me in the chat box, but we'll also have time afterwards for questions if you have any. So I'm happy and excited to have Erica and Salah here for our seminar today. Erica Bloom, for the past 11 years, she's been working in environmental and food systems policy, coalition building, program development, and fundraising. After graduate school, she became the program manager and then policy manager at the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. She transitioned to community food systems as the program director, then assistant director at Growing Hope in Ypsilanti. Now at the Ecology Center, she works on environmental health campaigns throughout the Healthy Stuff Lab programs, as well as supporting PFAS-impacted communities through the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network. Erica Bloom has an MS in Environmental Health and Justice from the University of Montana and a BA from Kalamazoo College. Our other speaker is Salah Ali. He's an electrical, electronic, and computer engineering professional at Ford Motor Company. His professional experience spans over 50 years across 4 industries: automotive, power, maritime, and consumer goods. In January 2020, Salah was appointed by Governor Gretchen Whitmer to Michigan's first ever Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, which was created to expand and improve input from impacted communities in the state's decision-making. He also serves on the board of the Michigan League of Conservation Voters Education Fund to help fight for fair and equitable policies that creates, restores, or protects Michigan's air, land, and water. Most recently, Salah has joined the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network and Dearborn's transition team for Mayor Abdullah Hammoud. Salah obtained his Bachelor of Science in Electrical and Computer Engineering at Wayne State University and his Master of Science in Electrical Engineering at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. He resides in Dearborn, and in his free time, he enjoys watching and playing sports and spending time with his family and friends. Thank you, Salah and Erica. Let me spotlight both of you. And you guys can get started.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everybody. I'm Erica. Jamie, actually, can you, there's a couple slides ahead of this one, if you could go up a bit.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So this is a presentation today on the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network, and Salah and I are going to be representing that network and talking to you about PFAS and how community-driven networks can make impacts across the states in the region. This is a photo I wanted to start with. One of our community leaders in the network, Kathy Woosterbarth, up in Oscoda, Michigan, protesting against the Department of Defense PFAS contaminating their water from firefighting foam. So next slide. So hello, I'm Erica. I'm the Toxics Campaign Director. I work at the Ecology Center in the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network.
Hi, everyone. As the bio indicated, I'm Salah Ali, and I'm a Dearborn activist, Dearborn resident, born and raised, community activist, an engineering professional at Ford Motor Company, and also a board member of the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network.
So I'm going to start us off today on just giving a brief background on PFAS. So PFAS, it's a clunky acronym for a slick set of chemicals, as one of my coworkers says, and I think that's a really great way to describe it. So can you go next slide? So PFAS stands for per and polyfluorinated alkali substances. PFAS were developed around the 1940s, and for decades, chemical companies have known that they can cause harm to human health. However, they continue to be manufactured into products that we use daily. So they're a class of thousands of chemicals, widely used in manufacturing consumer products. They're mostly in nonstick coating, repelling grease, stains, water, and fabrics. But they also have industrial uses in certain firefighting foams and manufacturing surfactants. They're a problem. They're a really big problem. Probably a lot of you have heard about how big of a problem they are. They don't break down in nature. And so they build up in the food chain, and they've been dubbed forever chemicals because of that. They're very toxic to human health and wildlife. They've been linked to all kinds of human health issues, reproductive problems, kidney failure, cardiovascular disease, suppressed immune system, and cancers. And at this point, there's really no medical way to remove PFAS from human bodies. And because they build up in our waters and fish and wildlife, many of our Michigan waters are contaminated. So next slide. I'm just going to fix. So how do PFAS enter the environment? So unfortunately, in a lot of ways. Some of the main ways are through wastewater discharge, and conventional wastewater treatment plants don't effectively remove all the PFAS, so they end up in our water systems and some leach into our groundwater. They're also runoff from firefighting foam, as I mentioned, is a really major water contaminant. Certain PFAS are put into firefighting foam, and they can leach from airports, firefighting departments, military bases. And again, these are things that are running into our waters. And then applied to agricultural lands. Like I mentioned, sometimes wastewater discharge is integrated into biosolids, which then is contaminated with PFAS and applied to agricultural land. And again, those can seep into the groundwater, as well as crops can take up the PFAS and get into our food supply. Next slide. So I just wanted to give you some quick numbers. According to the state of Michigan, the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, there's been 215 identified PFAS sites in Michigan. And 11, probably over 11,000 now estimated sites. So just because a site has been identified and that's been verified by MPART as contaminating groundwater over a certain standard, there's plenty of sites more that are areas of concern or we think that may be a site. And so MPART is still investigating many sites across Michigan. And PFAS is an expensive problem. According to Safer States, which is a national coalition of state organizations working on toxics policy, they've been tracking the cost of PFAS in states, and in Michigan, this is probably a low estimate of 140 billion estimated cost. I'm sorry, that number is wrong. That's wrong, but it's an estimated cost to taxpayers to clean up PFAS. So. Next slide. This is a map of Michigan PFAS sites from the MPART website. You can see that in Michigan, PFAS are all over our state. And really, what's interesting to me about this map is that, yes, they're concentrated in industrial areas like Detroit and some of the urban areas, but also in the Upper Peninsula where industry, there's less industry up there, and still we have contaminated fish. The tribes who are fishing, or some of the fish are still contaminated, some of the lakes. And so, different places like airports and use of firefighting foams are still contaminating the water. And so really PFAS is across urban, rural, people who are on wells, people who are on municipal drinking water systems and in all political districts too. So PFAS is kind of all over the place. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Salah, who's going to talk a bit more about the PFAS Action Network.
Hello, good afternoon once again. Thank you all for joining in. Again, we just want to provide visibility to who the impacts of PFAS and who Great Lakes PFAS Action Network is and some of the work that they've been doing so great. So if we can go on to the next slide. This is a quote by one of the co-chair of the organization, Sandy Winstelt. She's a Belmont resident, and granted, there are areas within the state that are more impacted with PFAS contamination than others, and Belmont is one of those areas. So she states, "My community has been drinking poison water and it's caused serious health threats for me and my neighbors. It's time to hold corporate polluters accountable and put a stop to this once and for all." And you're going to hear this resonating throughout the presentation, whether it be through data or some information that we share. But the PFAS contamination is a serious concern. Just knowing that the fact that it has a long life period in its impact, as well as not having any medical treatment to cure such a disease if consumed by way of water or food. Next slide. So again, more about the organization and why it was formed. PFAS has very little visibility in most parts of the state. So one of the reasons and actions that the network took, they felt that they need to create a coalition and prioritize impacted community voices, as well as building a powerful Great Lakes movement to address PFAS. We have one of the largest bodies of water in the whole country surrounded by our states. It's very important to preserve those natural resources, and knowing a contaminant like PFAS can put a detriment in this great body of water is very concerning. So to mobilize, there has to be some structured organization to take the lead. Also, as well as making sure that policies are in place, whether it be at a state level or federal level. We need to work with our legislators in understanding the importance of politics and the role they play in producing legislation to prevent further contamination, as well as finding resources impacted communities for local projects and advocacy, because at the end of the day, this is a small member organization that is looking to expand, and with it just being limited in resources, we need to find local projects and people that believe in the cause in supporting such an initiative. In the first year, there were recruited 5 impacted community leaders to help drive the network, and I'm actually one of those recruitments, because in Southeast Michigan, the PFAS isn't as predominant as air quality issues, right? Those are some of the concerns that the Southeast region of the state are more focused on, and vice versa as you go further north. So we're trying to learn from each other and trying to understand the impacts, not only PFAS that has contaminated water, but any contaminants that are in the air that end up into the water that also plays a role in that contamination. Next slide. And again, kind of alluding to what I was mentioning earlier, building a community-driven coalition across the Great Lakes region is very key. There's many experts and researchers and firsthand experiencers of this contamination that you can learn so much from. And it's creating a coalition that allows all these different groups of people from throughout the state to come together and share their experiences and knowledge, and being able to develop a strategy to overcome this tragedy, whether it be people from policymaking, legal, background, science, or just organizers and communicators within the region. Next slide, please. So who is the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network? These are the amazing five that I would like to refer them as. I'm the newest member to the group, but we have Sandy Winstout, the comment that you had read earlier in the slides. She is the co-chair of the organization, as well as Tony Spagnola. He's from Mascota, is also the co-chair of this organization, which is another region that's highly infected by PFAS contamination. Who is the picture on the right? So Kathy's on the top left, Tony's on the top right. Bottom right is Kathy Westerbarth, who's also from Ascota, where Tony's from, and she's part of now Need Our Water organization. It's a community action group, also looking to preserve and protect the water. And then the individual in the middle is Rob Kerr from Ann Arbor, who's also an advocate and a leader in the PFAS Action Network, and then is myself, who is the most recent board member to the organization. Next slide, please. So what is some of the work that has been done and some of the policies that we've been working on? One thing is we kind of look at it in three segmented parts. Protect impacted communities, prevent future contamination, and then additional testing and monitoring to make sure that our work is being, that the work that is being put in is containing some of the contamination moving forward from our strategy put in place. So holding PFAS polluters responsible for funding regular blood testing, monitoring, and other health studies in PFAS impacted communities. We want to make sure that we increase transparency in those areas to ensure that there is awareness, as well as banning the use of PFAS containing firefighting foams. With the advancement of technology and chemicals, there has to be a way to perform substances in such a way where it's less abrasive to the consumption or the effect that it has if gone into bodies of water, as well as prohibiting PFAS in food packaging and food contact, such as materials or cosmetics for that matter, or as Erica mentioned, in some of the nonstick applications that are out there for our daily use. And then when you look at it from the additional testing and monitoring, we want to make sure that there's increased research for PFAS tissue sampling in fish and wildlife. And in upcoming slides, you'll see some of that work being captured, as well as making sure that there's research that's funded to assess the hazards of growing crops. And that is ultimately the goal of establishing health-based criteria for food products, making sure that the research that is involved, there are better ways in making sure that we limit the amount of PFAS contamination, if not preventing it as a whole. Next slide. In addition to, kind of spoke to these 2 points as well, holding PFAS polluters accountable, not only providing test kits and whatnot, but also the cleanup cost to the impact that they produce, and then finding solutions and how to do that. So creating solutions and gaining funds from these polluters is going to be key as part of the PFAS policy action agenda. Next item. The network's activities in 2021. So as you see from the list, there's A lot of documentaries out there, most notably the No Defense, that had many accolades, and you can find on iTunes or Google Play Store. I would highly recommend everyone to check it out, learn. It has an interesting, interesting take on the military and the impact or the contribution they have in some of this contamination in certain areas. So it's a great watch. I would encourage everyone to look into it and watch this great documentary. Next slide. Governor Whitmer has been championing some of the environmental improvement efforts. In 2021, she directed state agencies to prioritize the purchase of products that do not contain PFAS. There's many alternatives to products without toxic chemicals, and the question is, why not? And sometimes I don't want to believe this to be true, but there may be some greed from corporations that find the cheaper chemical that's more toxic, as opposed to investing in cleaner chemicals that have less of an impact to human health. It's part of that advocacy that we're doing at the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network, is to advocate policymakers to enforce legislation that enforces certain chemicals to not be used in part of their chemical makeup of their products. If you go on to the next slide.
So that also should say executive directive. I see it's executive director. That was a typo. Sorry. Just to make sure people know it's the executive directive was
correct. Correct. So it was an executive directive. And we clearly know Gretchen Whitmer being the governor of the state. So next slide. And this is one of our co-chairs, Tony, who also was quoted in that publication that the governor came out. And it reads, the governor's executive directive makes clear that forever chemicals have no place in our bodies or our environment. We urge businesses across Michigan to follow Governor Whitmer's lead and remove PFAS from the products they sell, not just to state agencies, but to all Michiganders. And we call on the legislator to take immediate action to more broadly limit the sale of products containing PFAS. Tony has been a champion in this endeavor, and he comes with a wealth of experience and knowledge on PFAS contaminations and strategies on how to improve. Next slide. Erica.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit more just specifically about what's happening in PFAS in Michigan. You can do next slide. So as we've been talking about, PFAS are a really large problem in our state. They're a problem all over the country and frankly, the world. But we're really looking at this from a state level and regional level. PFAS have been contaminating Michigan waters for decades, really, and this issue has come up, in the last, several years as something really elevated that's being tackled at the local community level by people who have been directly affected by in their drinking water or groundwater, their fish, and so I just wanted to highlight this picture, which is Lake Huron. And it's a picture of foam that builds up, often on the shores of the lake that hasn't been tested by Eagle. They're hesitant to test it, but the citizens of Oscoda know, they know what they see, and they're very convinced that there's PFAS in it. And so one of the projects that the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network is going to start this year is supporting the Need Our Water folks up in Oscoda, where this foam is, to test some of the foam and work with residents on the ground to develop some of the studies and the designs and the education and outreach around testing this in other environments. Thanks. Next slide. I just wanted to show another number, quick number. So 2 million is the estimated number of Michigan residents that have been exposed to PFAS in their drinking water. The state of Michigan has about 10 million. So this is still a really substantial number. And if you think about it, it means either, we all have been exposed in some way, or we know people that have been exposed. So again, going back to kind of how this issue, it crosses all sorts of geographic boundaries, political boundaries, rural and urban. It's a problem that we all need to look at and really think about it from more of a community-based, holistic level, that rather than just our own, local hotspots. Next slide. Just some, for those of you who have been following a little bit, this is just some quick information about what's happened in Michigan. We are one of the states leading on drinking water and groundwater cleanup standards. So remember how I said PFAS are thousands of chemicals? Well, we have standards or maximum contaminant levels, MCLs, for 7 PFAS. And so that's a good start. The state has issued health advisories for a number of lakes and streams that have PFAS foam, telling people not to touch the foam, or asking people to take pictures of foam when they see it. And then in addition, a number of Michigan lakes and rivers have fish consumption advisories, which I'll get to a little bit more of, but my own river in my town of Ypsilanti, the Huron River, has a fish consumption advisory. So meaning I really am advised not to eat any of the fish. Next slide. So just a little finer point, because I know through Wayne State, really looking at what is happening in Southeast Michigan, there's a lot happening. And even though, there's a lot of other major environmental issues that are happening in Southeast Michigan, there's still, PFAS is still a big issue. And I think it's something that as we talk through and think about, what does water justice look like, in addition to different water topics that people are tackling, that we have to consider and think about PFAS as well. And so I just, kind of outlined a few of the ways that PFAS are showing up in Southeast Michigan. So, industry, we have the Marathon Petroleum Company using AFFF firefighting foam, which has resulted in some overflow along the highway and in the Rouge. Different watersheds have found PFAS in the surface water and fish, specifically looking at Rouge River and the Huron River. In agriculture, one of a major story that came out last month was some cattle was contaminated at a small Southeast Michigan farm, and that was discovered after sewage sludge was tested for PFAS. So that's a emerging issue that we're really looking at in terms of the biosolids. And remember in that first slide when I was talking about how PFAS enter the environment, biosolids is really becoming something that people are looking at and being really concerned that we need more information about that. Airports. So at the Detroit Metropolitan Airport, there was also some groundwater contamination as a result of the AFFF firefighting foam. Military bases, Selfridge National Guard Base is near Mount Clemens, and that has contaminated the Clinton River and Lake St. Clair with PFAS. And then landfills. So one example is the Arbor Hills landfill, which released PFAS into a pond and drains into Johnson Creek, which is a tributary of the Rouge River. So, it's in all of our stuff, and it's kind of in a lot of industries and getting into the environment in multiple ways. So it's a really complex problem for us to be kind of tackling. And again, getting back to what Salah was saying about why the network was formed is because it's so important for people all over Michigan and in Southeast Michigan to kind of see how their local local issues are part of other, bigger statewide issues, because there's military bases up in Oscoda and in Grayling, and so if we can come together as a network, we have a lot more power to tackle some of these local issues. So next slide. So I'm gonna turn it to Salah, who's gonna talk a little bit about fish.
Yeah, so my kind of backtracking to some of the information shared already. I joined the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice in January 2020, as well as the Michigan League of Conservation Voters Education Fund in that same month. So it's been about 2 years. The Great Lakes PFAS Action Network was recent as of last year, July timeframe. And throughout that time, I've learned so much. And one thing that I really realized through my experiences is how many environmental groups are working in silos, if you will. And some areas of Michigan are more predominant in certain parts of environmental issues than other parts of the state. As I mentioned earlier, northern Michigan are more concerned, and rural areas are more concerned with water contamination specific to PFAS. And southeast Michigan, highly dense urban areas are more contaminated and concerned with air quality. It was this action network that really brought us together and trying to learn from each other's experiences and how we can build on each other's experiences and knowledge to combat environmental injustices as a whole. This here is an event that just happened not too long ago, last weekend, where we visited the Rouge and Huron River, the Detroit River. And we actually went to collect some water sampling to understand the impact of contamination, if there's any PFAS contamination, and see if there's any correlation to some of the air contaminants that are emitted from smokestacks from surrounding industrialized areas. And trying to make that correlation between air quality and water quality, and finding similar impacts between the two based on the contaminants found in air versus water. Next slide. As Erica mentioned earlier, there are advisories in some rivers that prevent people from fishing and eating the fish from those bodies of water due to contamination, PFAS contaminants, one of which is Huron River, unfortunately. So there's an advisory, and as you see as the pictorial to the right, you'll see kind of what that advisory looks like should you run into it in any nearby body of water that you happen to be either residing next to or visiting in any part of the summer. Unfortunately, PFAS contaminated surfaces water from a Wixom chrome plating facility that has a direct impact in the Huron River. And unfortunately for the residents of Ann Arbor, that's a direct source of their water supply, drinking water supply. Next slide. Rouge River, this is kind of my area and my residence being in Dearborn. The PFAS has been found in surface of the Rouge River, and Eagle has tested fish throughout the Rouge, including the Newburgh impoundment. But we took it upon ourselves to do our own science and investigation and research to find out what contaminants are there, because the state only regulates certain contaminants. And as Erica mentioned earlier, there's thousands of variants of PFAS contamination, and we want to go beyond the research that the state is doing and understanding what other impacts these additional contaminants have on the human health. Next slide. So again, most importantly is community partnering. with statewide organization, and my affiliation with Mackey J and MLCV, two different bodies, but same goal in achieving environmental justice. If you go on to the next slide, please. This is one of our discussions with the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network that we, again, most critically, in addition to the research, we need to make sure lawmakers understand the science and derive policies that improve the environment, whether it be air or water. And this was one of the meetings that we had with lawmakers, a series of discussions that we had, one of which with Senator Brink, who was taking the lead on this, and we really appreciate her and her work that she's doing up in Lansing in trying to advocate for better policies to improve the environment. Next slide. And if you want to learn more on the impacts of PFAS, please visit our website, www.glpan.org. There's so much information that you can learn about the contamination of PFAS and the impacted sites, and along with the impacted communities. So if you have not heard of the organization, this would be a great opportunity to learn more. You can always reach out for more information, but the organization is doing great work, and we're trying to expand that knowledge to more areas of the state. And looking forward to everyone reaching out and learning more about the impacts and what they can do to help. Next slide. So again, from that same event, going out, we have Jeff and Melissa from the Ecology Center, great people, knowledgeable people that are actually taking the water samples from the river and testing it for any contamination. And this was an image from this past weekend where we collected water and are processing the samples to understand what contaminants. Results have not been furnished as of yet, but we definitely look forward to it and see what impacts the river has when it comes to some of the contaminants that impact the body of water, as well as the fishes that lie within. Next slide. I kind of touched a bit about this, but we try to find correlation between PFAS and air quality. And for Southwest Detroit and Dearborn, our main focus and concern with the environment is the air pollution and what everyone is doing to make that correlation. So again, anything that goes up must come down. Those contaminants and emissions that smokestacks emit into the air eventually make its way down, whether it be on the land surface or water. And that's where our correlation we're hoping to find, to see if there are any of those emissions that are emitting from the smokestacks, if any of those contaminants are found in the water samples that we've collected, we can then kind of drive that data to policymaking to understand and present the facts, and making sure that they're aware that when you have air quality issues, it impacts water, and when you have water issues, it impacts surrounding areas that also are burdened by air quality issues. Next slide.
I'm going to talk about a little about growing the network. If you can, next slide. So one of a big priority for this year is to expand the network to really reach more impacted communities in Michigan and across the Great Lakes region. I think this whole presentation, hopefully what you've gotten is that we really can't take on these big complex problems by ourselves in our communities, that the community is really where the expertise and the strength and the people who are directly impacted, that's where we want to make sure those folks are getting resources and are supported, and are really driving, you know, the strategy of the network. So one of our items that we're, you know, doing right now is outreach, and we're doing that right now through making personal connections with people, reaching out, listening, building trust with impacted communities, having community conversations. And again, I mentioned allowing impacted individuals to drive the network strategy. For those of you who have been a part of other coalitions, or you know, oftentimes it's an institution or organization driving kind of the coalition. And in this network, the structure is set up a little bit differently, where our community leaders are really driving kind of how they want to see, what they want the goals to be, what the structure should be. And the nonprofit organizations like myself at the Ecology Center is really there in a direct support way, and setting up, you know, connections to media, legislators, capacity building, resources, subgrants. But yeah, it's really about the people who are at the forefront of some of the worst contamination that we've, you know, seen in our water and land. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're doing right now. And I urge, you know, anyone who's listening now to think about, you know, if you're in an impacted community, to get in touch. If you know people who have been impacted, I mean, we have all been impacted, to say that, because PFAS is in all of our products, and we're, you know, all of us have encountered in our daily lives. But you know, impacted communities are those that really are at the front lines of industry or manufacturers that have been drinking contaminated water, or, you know, on soils that are contaminated. Next slide. This is our website that Salah mentioned, glpan.org. You can connect with us here. A great way to get connected is just to sign up for our emails that we've started, and you can learn more about what's happening with PFAS in Michigan, but also kind of some of the activities that the network is going to be doing this year. Next slide. We're also on social media, so you can connect with us at Great Lakes PFAS Action, and liking or following our page, really great way to stay involved. Next slide. So that's our presentation. Again, connect at glpan.org or at Great Lakes PFAS Action if you have further questions or just want to figure out how you can get involved with us. So with that, I think if there are any questions, definitely open to answering to the best we can, and take it from there. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much for presenting and providing all this really interesting information. Healthy Urban Waters was currently working on a couple of projects related to PFAS, and I am definitely aware of this network, but it's always just really interesting and good to learn more about all the initiatives that are going on related to PFAS. So yeah, we do have a couple of questions. I see Bob Burns has his hand raised. I'm going to hold off in a second because there are a couple that came through the chat. Just a second. There was one comment, and Erica, you might have actually already gotten this, but it was just, there's a group of academics that was recruited by Jessica Thomas from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and she facilitated the formation of Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. And part, they're just wondering if you were already in touch with them, which I think you guys are, but I just wanted to let you guys know of that comment. And if you're not already in touch, then they can provide a connection if you'd like. And then there is one question. Are there any current legislative initiatives related to PFAS that we should know about?
Yeah, sorry that was missed from kind of the part about working with legislators. That's probably an important piece too. There are a few bills right now that have been introduced. In the Senate, there is a bill introduced by Senator Irwin to ban PFAS in food packaging, food contact materials. The same bill is in the House, introduced by Representative Robbie. So we're really trying to encourage and support those bills. There's also a bill introduced by Senator Winnie Brinks, who Salah mentioned we did our press event with. She introduced a bill to hold PFAS polluters more accountable. So to actually extend the statute of limitations so that people who have been facing contamination of PFAS have more of a opportunity or timeline to sue a polluter. There are also a few important water related bills. One was passed by the Senate and is now in the House. It's a huge water infrastructure package. Billions of dollars that we're really supporting, and that has some funding for cleaning up PFAS contaminated sites as part of that bigger water infrastructure bill.
Muted. Bob Burns, I noticed you had your hand raised. If you want to quickly ask your question.
Yeah, hi, Bob Burns from Detroit River Keeper. Erica, I saw on one of your previous slides, you were pointing out some of the impacts of PFAS contamination, and you'd mentioned an incident with cattle, and it also mentions sewage sludge. Was there a relationship between the PFAS levels in the cattle and the sewage sludge?
Yes, that was something that MPART looked at. I won't be able to tell you the exact relations of numbers, but I know that there was elevated levels of PFAS in the biosolids from the wastewater treatment plant, and those biosolids had been directly applied to the agricultural land. And
so those sewage sludge was used as fertilizer application, liquid fertilizer application. Do you happen to know what facility that sewage sludge came from?
The Wixom facility.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know the name of it, except that Wixom was also the place where the Huron River was contaminated by PFAS from a chrome plating facility in Wixom.
Right.
So I believe there's a correlation between the wastewater treatment plant and the PFAS that are coming out of that chrome plating facility, but that is something that I would have to get a little bit more detailed on. But I don't know if your question is a larger, broader one about, yes, biosolids and sewage sludge is applied to agricultural land.
Right, I just want to make the connection that it was associated with biosolids for fertilizer. I'm curious, and I don't want to belabor the question, but do you know if because of that PFAS levels in the biosolid, the fertilizer, and found in the cattle, did they require that facility to stop allowing for sewage sludge applications on farm fields after that?
Actually, I don't know what they did. This is through MPART, and I will follow up because that's something I would like to know as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
We have another question in the chat, and I would recommend people either submit your questions through the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Another one, do you know if any Michigan drinking water plants have reported PFAS levels in their finished water? So by finished water, I'm guessing that means like water that would be that would be people for drinking.
I don't know. I know that the areas that I know about are, Ann Arbor, which has a GAC filter, which is a granulated activated carbon, and that has been filtering out so there's different types of PFAS. Long chain PFAS is what this filter can do. So I know that there's some conversation that some of the shorter chain PFAS chemicals are not getting filtered out, but to what extent or how that's happening, I would have to refer you to the treatment, water treatment. And then of course in Oscoda, for quite a long time, people were drinking contaminated water. But since I know that people have been on filters, and since the issue has come to light, they're not, but I'm not really the person to know all the details about that question.
We don't have any other questions as of now. I would like to just bring up one thing, which is one of the comments earlier about MPART. I would suggest if people do have, there's a lot of information on this MPART website, which is the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, and that there's just a lot of information on there. So I advise people, if you do have questions or thoughts or whatnot about, where PFAS is in the state, to go there. And I'm gonna drop the link in the chat. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to submit them to the chat.
There was one question to me about thoughts related to researching how to destroy PFAS, like new technologies, and supercritical water oxidation or plasma. I don't know, the technologies, but I know that there's a lot of new science, and we actually have occasionally people, approach us or call our Ecology Center offices to talk about this. And I think there's, that would be great. If that could happen. I think one of the questions that we have is, at what scale can they destroy PFAS, and kind of how accessible, like who would be able to use that? Is that something a state agency could use? Or, just a lot of logistical questions.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, oh, here's another question. What is known about PFAS in fish? Which lakes, which locations, which fish, and which organizations are measuring PFAS in fish? So there's a lot of questions.
I think MPART is really the best in terms of finding out what's happening with PFAS in fish, and EGLE to Environment of Great Lakes and Energy. The Ecology Center will be testing fish with the Friends of the Rouge River and the the Huron River Watershed Council has been engaged in some testing around fish on the Huron River. But that's partly, why we're kind of getting more momentum around this. And like Salah was talking about, we want to have more of a community-based design. So community members can be involved in some of those studies is an important part.
Yeah, just to elaborate and add on to that, MPART is your main resource, right? They have the resource expertise and being able to collect that information. We as an organization, just community activists, are doing our own science and trying to collect samples and try to understand beyond the contaminants that the state and MPART are testing for, what other contaminants are there in the water that we can also learn from and share with the cross-functional environmental teams throughout the state. So as I mentioned through the presentation, we did collect the sampling throughout the just last week. We haven't received the results, but please get in contact with the organization, whether it be via email or social media, and we'll make sure to share and add any information that becomes available from that research.
I also just want to mention too, I did drop a link in the chat to the consumption guidelines for fish with elevated PFAS levels, and that lists all of the fish that are on the Eat Safe Fish guidelines throughout the state. So it lists the water body, county, type of fish, chemical of concern, and the, size of fish and, like recommended, limiting servings per month for those who are fishing. I also do want to mention too, Healthy Urban Waters is also doing some PFAS testing of fish and water and sediment in Southeast Michigan. So that is also something to check out on our website. And let's see, there's another question here. What is your sense of the understanding by the public of the PFAS problem?
I could answer, Salah. You can also chime in.
Yeah, you cut off there. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. What is your sense of the understanding by the public of the PFAS problem? So like, how well do you think the public understands this issue?
I can tell you, as far as the Southeast region, very little. I included before joining this group, and the reason why I joined is really to learn more about PFAS and the contamination, and specifically the sites in which PFAS is found, from my awareness, right? Unfortunately, for some areas of the state, it's more reactive because they didn't know and they had to learn through experience, where areas like the Southeast region of the state, it's our time to really be proactive and understand the impact before it becomes a sustained issue. So that is why I took this initiative, and I am encouraging my network of friends, family, and environmental justice members to really understand the impact of PFAS, what it means, and how we can prevent it from exacerbating in the area. So hope that answers your question. But it's definitely a learning curve in trying to understand the various types of PFAS and the impacts each one has, and the applications in which some of these PFASs are found.
The film No Defense that Salah was talking about earlier is actually a really good primer to learn about what's happening, not only with the Department of Defense, but kind of how PFAS are permeating, so many parts of our life. And other main, I would say it's definitely becoming more of a mainstream issue in the media, but still, I would say it's emerging. A lot of people still don't know about it, so there's much education to do still.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with all of your points there. Yeah, in Southeast Michigan especially, I feel like it's not really that well known because most people get their water from like drinking water, from the city or from the drinking water treatment plant. When you're in a well water, you're more, I guess, more aware of things. So like, Escoda, they're obviously very aware of their water and whatnot. But anyway, yeah, it's definitely something that I think people should know about because I work in this area, but it's something that people should be aware of. But definitely recommending that documentary that's a very good good start for people who are interested. Well, we are at 3:30, so I'm going to wrap up, but thank you both so much for your presentation, and for the discussion. It was really helpful and super informative, and yeah, you guys, this was a great presentation, so thank you so much. I'm gonna just end this really quickly by just saying a recording of the event will be sent out following the event, and then our next Water at Wayne seminar will be on March 10th, so actually next Thursday, and Dr. Peter Esselman will be speaking on monitoring the Great Lakes ecosystem at scale with marine autonomous vehicles. So if you're interested and able to attend, I highly recommend signing up. If you've already registered for this event though, you will get the link for this event. So don't worry about having to register again, but I will send an email about that out. So thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.